Over the last 5 years, Spain has experienced a severe degradation of its liberal democracy. The separation of powers is fracturing under deliberate political pressure. We saw the apex symptoms of this crisis materialize in 2024. The government passed a highly contested amnesty law, and in a historically significant move, the Supreme Court opened a formal criminal investigation into the state's own Attorney General. Confronted with these escalating institutional failures, a distinct political reflex has taken hold across the spectrum: the pervasive belief that the 1978 Constitution is broken and requires a complete top-to-bottom rewrite. But initiating a constituent process demands sweeping, almost unanimous consensus. In today's highly polarized parliamentary arithmetic, achieving that level of agreement is mathematically impossible. More importantly, the intense focus on rewriting the Constitution is a dangerous distraction. It pulls attention away from where the actual systemic damage is located. The Atenia report identifies a critical flaw in that diagnosis. Spain's constitutional hardware is intact and robust. The current crisis stems entirely from targeted exploits written into the software. This is Spain's legal architecture. The bedrock is the 1978 Constitution. Above are organic laws and regulations. When isolating the structural damage, the reality becomes clear. The base layer is perfectly sound. The vulnerabilities, the stress fractures, exist exclusively in the middle and top layers. This distinction offers a massive strategic advantage. Repairing the system does not require impossible supermajorities or a risky national referendum. Restoring the rule of law is a pragmatic, achievable goal. It only requires targeted legislative patches to ordinary and organic laws. We start with the legislative pillar. Since 1978, the core tension in Parliament has been the disproportionate leverage exerted by regional nationalist minorities over the national majority. The exploit exists in the electoral law, the LOREG. Current rules allow parties that secure a negligible fraction of the total national vote to hold the balance of power, effectively extorting the formation of the national government. This bar chart demonstrates the mathematical fix proposed by the Atenia report. By establishing a hard 5% national vote barrier to enter Congress and form a parliamentary group, fragmented minority parties are denied seats, naturally consolidating power into stable national majorities. This is entirely legal. The Constitutional Court validated this exact mechanism in 1985, ruling that electoral barriers are a legitimate tool to prevent excessive parliamentary fragmentation. Amending this single electoral rule removes the math that allows anti-system minorities to hold the state's viability hostage. Inside the Congress itself, we find procedural loopholes that the executive uses to consistently dodge independent legal oversight. The government regularly bypasses mandatory impact reports from the Council of State. Instead of the executive submitting an official proyecto de ley, they have their allied parliamentary groups submit the exact same legislation as a proposición de ley. The regulatory fix is straightforward. Amend congressional regulations to mandate Council of State reports for all organic law propositions, regardless of who submits them. A secondary patch is required to stop the executive from indefinitely freezing opposition legislation. Parliament must cap the number of times the government can extend the period for amendments. Closing these specific loopholes prevents the executive from using parliamentary allies to smuggle unvetted, structurally damaging laws into the legal system. Moving to the judicial pillar, the damage traces back to a specific modification of the Judicial Power Act in 1985. This reform allowed Parliament to capture the judicial governing body, the CGPG. Instead of functioning independently, the CGPG is treated as an extension of the political arena. Parliament divides the seats based on partisan quotas rather than objective merit. This flowchart maps the turno autonómico vulnerability, allowing regional politicians to bypass meritocracy and directly insert preferred magistrates into high courts. The solution: returning to the 1980 standard. The 12 CGPJ judicial members must be elected exclusively by active judges, severing political influence. To complete the patch, the turno autonómico must be abolished, alongside the revolving doors that currently allow politicians to step down from elected office and seamlessly return to the bench. Decoupling these appointments from legislative quotas ensures that judges serve the law, not the political sponsors who appointed them. The most acute vulnerability sits right at the intersection of the executive and judicial branches, the complete politicization of the Attorney General. By design, the Attorney General's term perfectly aligns with the Prime Minister's mandate. This synchronicity effectively turns the office into a political shield for the executive. This dual timeline graphic outlines the required statutory patch, setting the Attorney General's term to exactly 5 years so mandates never sequentially overlap. We then introduce strict competency hurdles, 20 years of non-political legal experience, and a mandatory binding suitability report from the newly independent CGPJ. Finally, we install an institutional failsafe. If the Attorney General is placed under formal judicial investigation, they face automatic and immediate dismissal. These statutory requirements strip away the political armor, transforming the Attorney General from the Prime Minister's personal defense lawyer back into the state's impartial prosecutor. When executed together, these isolated legislative patches, amending the Electoral Law, the Judicial Power Act, and congressional regulations, collectively restore the separation of powers. Returning to our legal architecture model, we see the result. The software vulnerabilities are patched. The fractures in organic laws and regulations seal shut. The systemic weight of the government is once again evenly and safely distributed onto the bedrock of the 1978 Constitution. This exposes the core political reality. None of this requires a mathematically impossible constitutional consensus. It simply requires the political will to pass ordinary and organic laws. Democratic vitality comes from the citizens, but democratic survival relies on top-down maintenance. It requires rigid, independent institutions enforcing the rules. Saving Spain's rule of law does not demand the dangerous pursuit of a new constitutional order. It demands the rigorous, pragmatic enforcement of the one that already exists.